Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Boy, the news is big today. Lots of things happening. And apparently, I haven't seen them yet, but the JFK files are supposed to be dropping today. That should be huge. I'm kind of a geek on that. I'm looking forward to seeing it. The history is important. And, honestly, a lot of the things that happened back then are still happening today. So there'll be a lot to learn from that. And the history of corruption is a critical thing to understand because it hasn't changed. It's still there. Until we change it, it's going to continue on. So we got that going on. Judge Boasberg is still in the news. We got some stuff on that. And of course, we found out now that his daughter works for a nonprofit that is actively involved in advocating for and assisting with illegal immigrants, which is an interesting thing. It seems like he ought to have recused himself, but didn't. Shocker. And so we've got that. We've got a really kind of a neat video, the chemtrail thing, which is, of course, a conspiracy theory, except for, well, I don't know how you explain certain things like, say this particular video. We've got this video here. This guy had a super zoom camera, and he zoomed right in. Gotcha! And here you see that doesn't look like condensation from an airplane to me. I mean, call me silly. Maybe it is condensation, but that just let's look at this again. Let's look at this again, because we're supposed to believe that this is condensation from the airplane flying through. Now, could that be jet fuel dumping? Maybe, but isn't that chemical? Isn't jet fuel a chemical? So wouldn't that be then a chemtrail? I don't know what's going on with that stuff, but what I do know is that I'd prefer not to be lied to about it, right? Just tell us what's going on, and we don't have to wonder whether or not it's a conspiracy theory or anything else. Just tell us the truth. But of course, that's a lot to ask of our federal government. So anyways, we got all sorts of other things happening. But we have today with us a very interesting individual, Holly McKay. Now, Holly McKay, she's done Fox News. She's a war correspondent. She has been all over the place, and she's seen what war looks like. She's seen what things look like. And so she's got some very interesting perspective, and I'm very eager to hear what she thinks about all things that we're pretty much everything, right? You get an interesting person, you want to hear what they have to say about things. So I'm looking forward to chatting with her. We're going to cover everything, like current events, stuff she's seen, what she thinks about what's going on in the world. Like I said, it's great when you get someone interesting to talk to. So we'll see what comes of this. And you know what? It's my show, so she's actually got to talk to me. Usually interesting people like run out the door after about 30 seconds. But, she stuck with me for at least 50 minutes. So anyways, lots of good things today. Before we do, of course, please consider supporting us. GiveSendGo.com/RensLaw. Support our legal work, our fight. This keeps everything going. GiveSendGo.com because /RensLaw. Please become a consistent supporter, right? Monthly supporter. $20 a month is a cup of Starbucks a week. It makes a big difference to us. So if you can do it, whatever you can give, we appreciate. And then today, go to TomRens.com and support us there as well. TomRens.com, and check out Ren's Whole Cows, RensWholeCows.com. You can see it in the affiliate links. Go to affiliate, scroll down, Ren's Whole Cows. No lab grown meat, long shelf life, no mRNA in the cows, 100% natural, grass-fed, super healthy beef. Check them out. It's good stuff. I love it. And I've been looking really hard. We want to get really the healthy food stuff going. We all know maha, but maha starts with making yourself healthy, right? You got to make yourself healthy, and that starts with eating right and doing good things. So make sure you're checking out Ren's Whole Cows. You want to do that for you and your family. So, all right. Well, without further ado, I want to bring Holly on because, again, pretty much everything I have to say, she's got perspective on, right? She's a news person. She's an official news person, right? Not like me. I just pretend to do it on the side, but she's an actual real life newsy type person. So let's get her perspective on things. How you doing today, Holly?
Hi, Tom. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you. So for anybody that doesn't know, you've got this tremendous background. You've been a war correspondent. You've been all over the place. Originally, I believe, from Australia.
Yes, yep. Born and raised
And
in Australia, but been in the US for almost 20 years.
okay, okay. And you've traveled the world as a war correspondent. And I mean, you've done a lot of other news and work as well. And kind of, where have you been? What have you seen? Where have you gone? Kind of, what's your list? What are the
Oh
interesting
gosh.
places?
Yeah, well, I've worked in more than 50 countries, a lot in the Middle East. I've spent a lot of time in Iraq and in Syria, and a lot of time in Afghanistan. I was there, I was the only, I think, American journalist that actually stayed through the fall, and I continued to stay there for another 6 months after that, and then went back again the following year. So Afghanistan's very close to my heart. I've also spent significant time in different parts of Africa, most recently in Sudan, Darfur region. I've worked a lot in Latin America. I just got back a few days ago from work in Mexico, but also worked Colombia, Venezuela, El Salvador, so all through that region. And then a little bit in Asia as well, in Burma and Pakistan. And I guess you can include Afghanistan and all of that. So kind of hit the different parts of the world.
So you've kind of seen it all. You've kind of been all over the place. I believe you were you also in Ukraine?
I was in Ukraine during the invasion,
Yeah.
and I went back several times in Bakhmut as the Wagner Group was taking it over,
Yeah.
and then sort of across different parts of Ukraine.
Well, I'm very interested to hear your perspective on things. I mean, listen, as we're talking about, you got Trump out here, and he's trying to end wars all over the place. Now, we love Trump here, it doesn't matter whether you do or not. I love the idea of ending war because, I mean, war is it's an atrocious thing, and I don't think a lot of
Mm.
people understand. I think when and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, when we talk about war, when we see war in the headlines, when you have a 2-minute clip or 2-minute bit that's going to run on the nightly news, they show some missiles launching, they may show some buildings that were blown up, you see a couple soldiers, and you get a voiceover from a news reporter who has whatever insight they can give you in 2 minutes. But the situation on the ground, as a younger man, I got to travel a bit and I got to see some different things, some of which I wish I could unsee. But the situation on the ground is quite different, isn't it? I mean, when you actually talk to me a little bit about seeing the actual people and hearing what's actually happening, as when you live there, when you're physically hearing about it, not just a 2-minute clip.
As the history books will say, it's absolutely hell. It's hell for everybody involved in it. You rarely see any good come out of it, except for both sides, lives are destroyed, people's lives are destroyed, and I think what's infuriating, and especially you can relate as a lawyer, is that these people have had oftentimes the worst things imaginable that have done to them. They might have been, had their children killed, their house
Yeah,
bombed, they've lost everything. A lot of the times women can be subject to rape as a weapon of war.
yeah,
And through all this, what's infuriating is they know that no one will ever be held to account for what they
no,
did. No one will ever be brought to justice for the sort of havoc that they wreaked on your life, on your family's life, on your community's life. And that often cases, people will still see the perpetrators to these crimes just walking down the street. And so
yeah.
that is the importance of, while we do want to focus on ending wars, we also have to end them in a way where there is some semblance of accountability and justice, because without that, it's a very temporary solution, and you're only going to see the conflict bubble up again in potentially a worse way in a month or 2 years.
Well, I would agree with you 100%. Now, I had the privilege, my mentor in law school was actually a Nuremberg prosecutor. And
Mm.
I had the opportunity in law school to be involved and to meet a number of the people who've been involved with some of the international criminal tribunals from some of the, that were occurring, after some of the wars around the world. It's really interesting. And I do think that justice is necessary because at the end of the day, you get through a war, and what's it about? Well, the people at the top, the people who are sitting in the political offices or whatever, they got their territory, they got their this, they got their that. But the people who are actually living there, who, as you said, lived through rape and their house being blown up and their children dying, well, there's no victory for that. It doesn't matter which side wins; they've still lost. I think that's kind of a big thing, and you've seen that a lot. I mean, that's consistent across every war, right?
Absolutely. As I said, in all the wars and conflicts that I've covered, I've just never seen anything. Nobody ever comes out better, I don't think, of the other side. And that's not to say that, the other side of war, I think, is you see the best, you see the worst in people, but you also see the best in people. You see, people's support for one another. You see communities helping each other. You see people coming together. You see incredibly selfless acts. But, still with all of that, there's sort of the collective trauma that comes from that, the financial ruin, there's nothing of benefit coming out of a war in that I've ever witnessed.
Well, and I want to put words in your mouth, and then you correct them or tell me what's right or wrong or what you agree with. And the reason a lot of what we're saying now may seem self-evident, right? But I don't think people think about this, right? We all talk about war in the abstract, like the movie that we just saw, or the this we just saw, or the that we just, but we never think about the specifics, right? So, we take, oh, I don't know, any war that you want to pick, they tend to always be over the same stuff, territory, who controls what. But if you live in the territory that's disputed, Palestine, Ukraine, doesn't really matter, Darfur, wherever you live, the war that's going on, one side or the other tends to be the right side in the media, depending on what your perspective is. But if you're the person living there, and there's missiles coming from airplanes that you may not even see. There may be bombs being dropped from 30,000 feet. You never even see the airplane. You don't know it's coming. You just know that you are constantly in fear that a drone or a missile is going to hit in your neighborhood and kill your family. And when it does, it may blow up your home. You wake up and everything you had is gone, including maybe your family. And you live in that fear in perpetuity from the beginning until the end of the war. And, frequently, again, this is over things like who controls what property, who has access to what resources. It's rarely over something that's so morally repugnant that there's no choice but to take a stand. I mean, the last, we had World War II. That's a great example where the world, we had to stand against Hitler. But most wars that are occurring today are over who controls what resources. They're over money. They're over power. And if you're one of the people who are living and worrying every day whether your house is going to be blown up, your family is going to die, or maybe your house is already blown up and your family did die, that's kind of a different thing. You've talked to those folks, right?
And that's the focus of what my work is. In fact, like, I find what we call as journalists, the bang bang is the sort of kinetic conflict side of war. Whatever missile was used, the different weapons. That to me is the least interesting part of
Agreed.
War. It might look great on a video news segment, but really as a writer, which I primarily am, it's not that interesting to write about who's shooting a missile or who's firing a gun. What compels me to keep going back to these places is those human stories, is the people that their names will never be in headlines. They're not officials. They're not government officials sitting in a beautiful office sipping tea. They're the people that are living in the displacement camp. They're the people that are at the morgue trying to find the body of their missing child. They're the people that are just deep in mourning. And they're the people who will give you the most real and raw and accurate depiction of what war is and what war does to people. officials can tell you whatever they like for as long as they like, and to me, it can be part of a story, but it's very rarely the part of a story. What I'm much more focused on is the people that are actually living through this. They don't have a home in Dubai to go to.
No.
They have to stay where they are, and they have to try to pick up the pieces of whatever their life is, or simply each day try to survive. And to me, that is the story. That is why I keep going back. I don't have any grandiose ideas that war journalism changes the trajectory of anything or changes the world. I certainly don't have those kind of stars in my eyes. But what I do believe is that you're often telling the stories of people that have been rendered incredibly voiceless. They are the people who are made to, they're caught in the crossfire, they're collateral damage. And simply by telling their story, by sharing their story, you are giving them some semblance of justice and the sense that their story, that their, what they have to say does matter in the larger scheme of things. And for me, that is the biggest draw card.
Well, it should matter, and it not only should matter; it's necessary that we start focusing on that. And I'm hoping, with the rise of the independent journalism that we're seeing right now, I joke a little bit about the, being a pretend broadcaster in the podcast, but the reality is that there's no control over what I say. So when I decide that I want to talk about that family who had to watch their daughter be raped before the family was murdered, I can say that, and I don't care whether anybody likes it. Now, the only thing that dictates whether or not it's heard is whether or not the audience cares. And that comes down to we the people and whether we the people actually care about what's happening. And, but this is really relevant and critical. And right now, it's politically relevant. We see this push, and I think Ukraine is one of the most important topics on the planet right now. Politics aside, it's interesting to me to see the two sides. We have one side we have the kind of the Trump camp pushing for peace, right? Let's just get to peace. And that's that. The other side, let's continue fighting because we need to control these resources. And that's really what it comes down to. There's no other reason to fight, right? I mean, this is about who controls certain resources and certain land. But the people who are dying on that land, no one's asking that. There is no one with a camera saying, "Hey, would you like this war to continue, or would you be willing to, not worry about which side of the border you're on if it meant your family quit getting bombs dropped on you?" No one's asking that question, and maybe they say no, it's worth fighting for. But maybe they don't. But no one's asking that question. So I think this is a foundational thing. Now, you've been to Ukraine. What do you think about? I don't care about the politics. I'm not asking about that. What do you think about what's going on with the people there?
So, I mean, what you're going to hear in Kiev or Odessa is going to be different than what you're going to hear in the Donbass, in Donetsk. Because it's a very different sort of mentality there. Just to kind of give you a little bit more context to this. So I went to Crimea, it was about 18 months after it was annexed. And I met with a lot of people there, all different walks of life, different professions, different ages. And I would say that 90% of the people there told me that they wanted to be Russia. And I preface that by saying even people that were very pro-Ukraine and very against what had happened had changed their mind, because when they needed to get their passports or needed to get official documentation or have something done, Kiev very much treated them like traitors and said, and made their life very difficult when they were, something that was very much out of their control had happened. On the flip side of that, you had Moscow that was saying, well, here's your passport, here's this, welcome to Russia, blah, blah, blah. And so eventually people are going to decide whatever is going to be the easiest mechanism to live their life. They're going to go with that, even if they don't agree politically. So that was the mistake fundamentally that I believe that Ukraine made with Crimea. And then, what I have seen in the last few years is that similar mistake being made in these separatist areas. So people that, were not necessarily pro-Russia by any means, being kind of discarded, treated like traitors, their lives were made hard. So naturally they're going to gravitate, to the side that's making their life easier. So I will say that I think majority of people in those areas, in my experience, wanted to be on the Russian side of the equation. And I remember in Bakhmut, and it was in November of 2022, when it was just, really intense bombing campaign by Wagner Group to kind of wrestle control of that. That was sort of just maybe a month or two before they did actually control it. But going to this one store that was still operating, that was completely bombed out. They were selling like a few Mars bars and some drinks. And, there was this old guy in there, and he was trying to convince me that it was the Ukrainians bombing them. And I'm trying to explain, but the weapons are coming from this direction. That's not the Ukraine's direction. But, there was really no telling him. So long story short, I think, if there is going to be some form of a resolution going forward to this, I do think there has to be an acknowledgement of these areas, and whether Ukraine even wants to bother with the control of that. Because again, the mentality of these places is going to be significantly different to the mentality in Kyiv or other parts of Ukraine. So you're sort of not dealing with a completely holistic, let's keep going.
Yeah. Well, and that's an important thing. When we think about what's going on there, I just don't see. Yeah, as you said, from what I've heard and from what I've been able to ascertain, not everybody in Ukraine wants to be in Ukraine. And the idea that we just have to continue as was seems to be a bit of a stretch. And I'm sure that a lot of these people are just tired of seeing their families die over something that really, I mean, if both governments stink, which apparently they both do, let's just quit the killing and move forward. Let's shift a little bit to the Middle East, which I think, and especially Northern Africa, some of the Islamic areas. And I'm not anti anything, right? So there's good people of every race, creed, and religion, and there's bad people of every race, creed, and religion. But we have seen some horrific horrors coming out of the Middle East, and I don't think a lot of people really recognize culturally and socially how different it is. We've seen one of the things that was really interesting to me, and I'm interested in your perspective on kind of two things, because as a woman reporting in the Middle East, that in and of itself is an interesting thing, right? I mean, especially in a war zone. And then, one of the things that we've seen a couple different things where I don't think people are quite understanding the more terror-oriented side of Islam, right? There's a lot of contempt for a lot of things that we think are foundational here: respect for women, respect for, you live your life, I live mine. Okay, you're gay, well, fine, be gay. That's not a thing, right? I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because I'm trying to understand how how difficult it would be to navigate reporting, as a woman in some of these harsh areas where they really don't have a lot of respect for women.
Yeah, it's interesting, kind of. There's different components to it. So as a Western woman, you are sort of this arbitrary lane. You're kind of this third gender where you're not expected to behave the way that the local women are, or have to completely dress the way local women do, but you're not a man. So you have this kind of gray area, which is actually quite advantageous as a woman, because you can go and sit with the men and interview the men, but at the same time you can also go and sit with the women and spend time with them, which my male colleagues can't do. So there is an advantage to that. Having said that, there's also obviously a lot of other safety sort of precautions that are required. For the most part, for me, that I've been very fortunate in very much trusting the people around me. And I've always worked very much under the radar. I don't have security teams. I don't have, anything fancy. I put a lot of trust in my local fixer. And that's sort of the person that they kind of an interpreter, but they also help you set up meetings. And they're very much, my family when I'm there, my protectors. And I've always been very blessed to work with incredible people that I've always felt very comfortable with, that I know will take great care of me. That's not to say that there has been, incidences. I remember in Iraq once when I was actually I was staying with some American contractors, and it was a driver for them that like broke into my room one night. So, I had to fight him off. So there have certainly been some incidences like that have happened, but really for the most part, I've been very fortunate and very lucky, to really, I guess, hone in it sounds crazy, but my intuition is really my greatest security apparatus, in trusting. And whenever I have been in situations that I felt uneasy, I don't second guess that. I'm quick to remove myself. But really, I have the locals people that I work with, which are usually men, to thank for really keeping me safe. And they see it really fundamentally as their responsibility to make sure that nothing happens to me. And I know that a lot of women journalists are certainly not that fortunate, but I do look back sometimes at situations maybe that I put myself in my 20s, that I certainly wouldn't do that now with the knowledge that I know. But again, it's that trust that you have to develop, and the precautions that you have to listen to yourself. You have to listen to your own signals. You have to be really in touch with what is happening around you. And that is, for me, sort of the greatest gift that I can give myself.
So I want to take from that, and I want to extract from that and share with the audience. I want people to understand something. So you're listening to a woman who's been in some of these areas, some of these war zones, some of these tough areas, right? And who's got experience, who's lived through, who's done this. Now, within this discussion of what it's like, reporting as a woman in some of these areas, you mentioned that you actually had to physically fight off someone who broke into your room one time. You mentioned that you have to constantly trust your intuition. Now, I do believe, and obviously there is no universal statement about any faith, creed, or religion or culture. But in many places in the Middle East, especially in some of the Islamic areas, there's a moral duty, if someone's your guest, to give them protection, to watch over them. So if you've got a good fixer, it's their duty, and that's a duty that's respected in communities, in many places. So if you've got a good fixer, you're right, that's a huge deal. But the simple fact of the matter is I want people to hear what Hollie's saying here. When you go into the Middle East, in many areas, not all areas, right? I mean, certainly you can go to Dubai, you can go to, there's plenty of wonderful areas that people go to. But when you go into the Middle East, into some of these more war-torn areas, you have a situation where, as a woman, you have to worry about whether you're going to be raped, whether you're going to be attacked, what's going to happen. And it's an interesting thing that I want to point to, and you can react when I'm done with this, because we also have areas where if you're found to be gay, they will literally throw you off a building. They will execute you. You don't have to worry about trans rights in many of these areas, because if you tried to be trans, you would be executed. And these are things that are really, it's not, they're abhorrent. It's abhorrent. But it's a reality. Now, I want to bring that up, and I want to talk about that. And I'm curious as to your thoughts, having been there and having experienced this, because I see, and I'll never forget when I saw this the first time. I saw, I think the group was Gays for Palestine.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, there's some different groups where you see this sort of thing. And to me, it's remarkable the total and complete failure to understand that the people you're supporting are people who would execute you for living the way that you live. So you're going to complain about America or Israel or someone, say, having beef with these guys, but these are people who, if you were in their nation, would execute you. Now, maybe
Mm.
not as a guest, but if you lived in their nation, that would not be. So I'm curious at what your thoughts are on that. I think I know it's a touchy thing to talk about, but it's a real situation.
It is a real situation, and unfortunately, that is, very prevalent in still many parts of the world.
Yeah.
In a lot of these places, you could, with zero recourse, a woman, a girl will be stoned to death if somebody makes a complaint and says that, she had a relationship with some other guy and it's completely unfounded and there is absolutely no evidence to back it up. And yet she will lose her life in the same way you could make an accusation against someone for being gay, whether there was any
Yeah.
burden of proof or not. So that is something that is very real in many parts of the world. And that's why, you won't hear people even talking about that because the level of danger and what is at stake is incredibly high.
Yeah. I think it's an important thing because I'm very much a human rights guy, right? And, human rights, when we talk about war, I want it to end. When we talk
Mhm.
about, what if there has to be a war, who should we be backing? Well, the guys that aren't stoning people. Let's back the
Sure.
guys that aren't stoning people, right? Let's start with that because, I just I don't agree with that. So, I mean, sometimes there's no good guy in the room, and that's an issue. But at the same time, this is something that I don't think it's interesting because our mainstream media does not talk about these things, and they're foundational. How do you not talk about these sorts of human rights abuses? These sorts
Mm.
of egregious, not just a little bit. These are egregious, right? Uh,
Mm.
you know, someone gets jealous of someone else or mad at someone else. Hey, that guy is gay, or that guy is this, or this girl is this, or this girl is that. I mean, this girl was shacking up with this. Well, they get drug out into the street and people throw rocks at them until they're dead. um,
Mm.
how do you, in your experience, have you ever tried to talk about that in any sort of a mainstream media context? Is anybody willing to report on that, to discuss that, to kind of go into that? Because if we don't discuss it, it's never going to get fixed.
Mm. Absolutely, and I think a good example that sort of segues with that in Afghanistan. I think a huge opportunity was missed in
Yeah.
um, Afghanistan has sort of a practice where boys dance. They call them dancing boys, bacha boys, and you have groups. And mind you, this happens government from U.S. government-backed officials to Taliban to it's practiced widely, put it that way,
Yeah.
where they will actually just take young boys off the street or wherever it is and force them into these kind of dress them up and force them into these very twisted, very sick acts, and then essentially sexually abuse and rape them. And it's sort of it's widely practiced and kind of widely accepted. And I think a huge mistake that the United States made was that they had an opportunity to absolutely say, we are not effing putting up with this. Like, we're
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
But the US didn't want to quote unquote culturally offend. There was a case, I believe it was a Green Beret, who saw this happening to a child and just, beat
Yeah.
the crap out of the perpetrator. And, he didn't kill them. He just knocked him around a bit. The guy was fine. But he was court-martialed as a result of that. That was under
Yeah.
Obama administration. And then it wasn't until there was a big outcry that he was actually let go. But I just think that was a wasted opportunity. We had an opportunity to absolutely say, we're not going to put up with this. And if you look back just through history, I mean, the Hindus used to have a practice called sati, where, if the guy had committed some kind of wrong, they would kill the wife and really in a brutal way, basically burn her to death. And that was part of the punishment. And the British came in and said, we're not playing. Like, if you kill one more person, we're going to come and, slaughter you. And pretty quickly that practice turned around.
Yeah.
It's now in the books of history. We
Yeah.
had the opportunity to do that in Afghanistan, and unfortunately we didn't do it. But I hope that we can look back at this and say, sometimes you do have to culturally offend to make progress. Sometimes cultural offense takes a second place to what is a basic human right. And I
Yeah.
think that is something that it can be a little bit difficult in diplomacy, but I do think in a case like that, there is a very clear right and wrong.
Well, I mean, the irony to the whole thing is that these perverts that would molest these children, these little boys, were the same people who, if you came out, if you were a regular, those are the people in power, right? So if a regular citizen, someone not in power, comes out as gay, well, they risk being put to death. But the leaders are okay. They're allowed to sodomize little boys. I mean, it's sick. It's like, and the idea that we can't culturally offend stands for this absolutely ignorant idea that moral relativism is real, which it isn't. I'm sorry, Hitler was not okay. There's nothing about that culture that was okay. There's nothing about sodomizing young children that's okay. And yes, we do need to culturally offend if that's happening. We need to say hell no. And we need to put a stop to that. But we didn't, because Obama, Biden, these guys, they're okay. They don't care. They have no morals. They have no standards. And I don't, I mean, and by the way, we are political here. I have absolutely no respect for that whatsoever. I'm an advocate, and that sort of stuff is sick. So, yeah. All right. Well, so that's really interesting. And that's it's appalling, frankly. It's appalling. What else on, by the way, everybody, before I forget, Holly S. McKay, MCKAY.substack.com. HollySMcKay.substack.com. Make sure you're checking out hollymckay.com. Please support her. Please back her. Please make sure that you're following her. Follow her everywhere. Well, you can hear very well spoken, brilliant woman who's had the opportunity to see some things, so you get some good perspective from some different things. What do you care about right now? What's big on your radar? What are you working on?
So I just returned. I was working in Mexico, looking at cartel issues there, but really specifically. And a lot of people don't know this, and it's shocking because it's right on our, it's our border country, and so we should care. Up to 150,000 to 200,000, that's a big number, of people in Mexico are disappeared. They're missing. They're never found. There's no trace over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I was doing there was interviewing mothers who, in many cases, some of them upwards of 10 or 15 years, been trying to locate their children who disappeared into thin air and have never been heard from again, assumed to have been taken by organized criminal groups like trafficking groups or cartels. And so I just think this is mind-blowing to me, that this statistic, and they get no help from the government, zero help. So you have people, mothers whose lives have just been ripped apart, and here they are trying to piece this together, and they can't get help. They're warned in many cases not to go to the authorities, because the authorities are getting money from the cartel that is running that particular area. Can you imagine? So you see these parents, and in one house I went to, their son, who was a communications engineer in Mexico City, and he was driving to see friends of his in Texas who were expecting a baby, and he disappeared in Monterrey, in a northern state, one night, presumably by the Zeta cartel, who just would take people and see how useful is this person to us, and they may be useful to a short period, and then they'll kill them when they're not. And a lot of the times, they dissolve these bodies in acid, so there is zero trace. It's really sick stuff, but they get no support. So these mothers, they rely on each other. On weekends, they have these collectives. They go into parks and they dig for bodies, basically using their bare hands. And it's shocking to me that is something it's happening, on our border, and that people have to endure this and live their life. And for me, seeing that and seeing what these women have to go through, and that sort of pain and the lack of closure, and as they describe to me, it's commonplace in Mexico. It's normalized to just disappear in Mexico. Whereas, here it's like, oh, that's shocking. There's a missing person. Let's see what we can do to find them. Let's have an Amber Alert. Let's whatever. Yep. In Mexico, it's just like, oh no, someone else went missing. Like, okay, next conversation. And that to me is just not okay. And that, for me, I want to see these cartels obliterated, not just for the benefits for the United States of America, but because the people of Mexico, who for the most part are lovely, kind, hospitable, incredible people, they deserve a better life than what they're getting. They deserve a government that's going to help and support them. I'm going to give Miss Scheinbaum the benefit of the doubt and hope that it's something she puts in her radar. But Alamo previously, where he dedicated his efforts? He dedicated his efforts into making people look for whether these so-called missing people had a flu shot or taken money out of an account or whatever it is, because he was convinced that the people on this registry were no longer missing. So instead of putting resources into actually helping people, he put resources in trying to prove that the disappeared numbers weren't as high as people were saying. And
well, of course,
that's just such incompetence.
Well, I mean, listen, let's not beat around the bush here, right? So the reason so many people are disappearing is because we're supporting the cartels here in the United States. I mean, the open border policies allowed for child trafficking on a scale that's heretofore unseen in world history. I mean, the amount of child trafficking that has occurred, if half of what we're seeing is true, is unprecedented in world history. And the United States is the leader in child trafficking on the planet. The cartels know, and feel free to disagree with me on this, but the cartels know that there's great money in children, maybe more money in trafficking children than drugs, and they don't care what they traffic. These aren't ethical people. They're looking for money, and they don't care how they get it. And when they realized how much money there was in trafficking and sexually exploiting children, well, guess what they did? And it's not just sexual exploitation, right? We've heard stories, organ harvesting, all sorts of horror stories, you name it. Now, it's difficult to connect the dots, and I think you'd probably agree with me on that, Holly. I mean, it's very hard to show exactly how many of these kids were kidnapped by the cartels to be trafficked to the United States through the wide open border. But one of the things that's not really disputable is the closed or controlled borders is going to have a huge impact on that, and there's going to be less demand, and so less children will probably go missing. We did see an explosion. Anybody who talks to anybody south of the border, anybody who pays any attention, please disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, would say, yeah, when we opened the borders up wide open under Biden, well, guess what? A lot more kids started going missing. Why? Well, because they needed to there was an open border. They could, whatever supply they could provide, there was demand for, because apparently we have a lot of perverts in this country. So the number of children missing during the from Central South America, Mexico, was reportedly incredibly high through the Biden administration. And the dirty secret that no one wants to talk about, because of course there's no great government statistics to demonstrate this, right? Why? Because the government doesn't want to look at this. They don't want to look into these things. They don't want to demonstrate what's happening. The cartels own the governments in Central and South America. They could 100% own. So there's no one looking into this. There's no statistics. So it's a don't ask, don't tell thing, right? Everybody knows what's going on. It's an open secret, but nobody wants to say it. Am I way off on this?
No, I mean, trafficking is a huge part of the cartel revenue, and the US is the economic powerhouse, for that. Certainly, I think when it comes to both drugs and trafficking, we here in the United States need to look at our side of it, which is the demand. And I think that there is a big reckoning that needs to happen here too. Why do we have this demand for children and for drugs? And what part can we play in rectifying this? But certainly cutting off the supply is hugely important. And that's why I do think that initially I was a little bit skeptical of the terrorism label, just because I do see, again, being the anti-World War reporter, I do see an important part of dialogue being an important part of trying to reconcile. But really, the more that I've worked there, the more that I've got to know sort of this mentality, the more there is no kind of there is no dialogue with these kind of sick individuals.
Like negotiating with Hitler.
And the terror that and primarily, yes, they're driven by money, and they don't have the same sort of ideological goals that an Al-Qaeda might have. but they are reigning terror in a different way. They're consumed by power. They have absolutely zero regard for the people, the communities around them, and the lives that they're absolutely destroying. And what we've tried in the last 15, 20 years clearly hasn't worked, because the problem has gotten worse. So I do support taking a different approach, rattling the cage. It may or may not work out, but I do think that this hardline approach is necessary. And most Mexican people, even if they don't like Trump at all, will still tell you what he's doing is working in that sense, because it's forcing the Mexican government to act. They're extraditing these cartel leaders. They're sending troops to the border. They're cracking down on these fentanyl labs. This is all action that, and this shows you, this could have been done long ago. The political will wasn't there. The tension, the stress, the threat of tariffs wasn't there before. So therefore, they had no incentive to act, especially because the corruption is so systemic. But because the threat of tariffs is looming over Mexico, and that would really decimate their economy in many ways, you are seeing positive steps forward that is important to acknowledge and to say this is a step forward. But it is also angering, because it does show you that it could have happened long ago, and it didn't, and many lives have been lost in that process.
Let's hit the hardest topic you had there, and that's this. I don't like war. I don't like killing people for no reason. But the terrorist designation, drone strikes against cartels, things like that, the things that may occur as a result of that, I support that. And the reason I support that is I always want to avoid war if we can. I would much rather discuss it, talk about it, find a way to work it through. But how do you negotiate with someone who is willing to murder a child? How do you negotiate in good faith with someone who will sell a child into sex slavery? And to me, I don't think you can. What, are you going to trust them? What, they wouldn't lie? Do you think that someone who would literally sell a child into sex slavery would have a problem with lying? What, they're ethical? Of course they're not ethical. So I don't know the value of negotiating with people who've demonstrated that they have no moral code or compass to keep them honest to what they're saying. They'll say whatever they want to say and do whatever they want to do. Negotiating is pointless. And when you have a situation like that, and remember, cartels they're not nations. They're not groups of people where there's some good, some bad, and some indifferent. They are criminal enterprises who exist for the sole purpose of making money in any way possible without regard to the law, without regard to injury, to pain, to suffering. And so whereas and of course I'm a fan, obviously, I love law. Everybody deserves due process. But let's be realistic. There's no due process for the child who's been raped and sold into sex trafficking. There's no due process for the person who was kidnapped to act as a mule for temporarily, who then broke their leg and was no longer capable of being a mule, so they shoot you and then burn your body in acid. There is no due process for the people who are brought into these gangs, and it turns out they're not quite as good at killing as someone else, so they're just shot because they're not useful to the gang. We have to understand what we're dealing with there. These aren't people who are, there's some good, Ukraine, good people there, bad people there. Middle East, good people there, bad people. Everywhere has good people and bad people. That's not the situation with the cartels. The cartels are the bad people. They are people
Absolutely.
So I like that designation. I like the harder line. And despite the fact that I'm very much about due process and giving people an opportunity to reform, I think it's necessary here to protect kids and to stop the violence. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, again, what these beautiful, lovely families have to endure is just sickening. As one mom said to me, and her son, in 2021, I believe, he was 16. He had a new girlfriend. He bought her a present. He was really excited to give it to her, and wanted to she lived just a few blocks down, walked down the road to give it to her, and never came home. Never made it there. Never came home. not without any help from authorities. This poor mom, she had to, pay money. And, she was someone who was a house cleaner. She didn't have money, but she managed to find it to be able to get some surveillance. And in one of the cameras, you see him walking. In the second camera, you see this sort of hooded male just kind of put his hand on her son, Axel's back. And then that was it. He was disappeared. And so what these cartels do is they take young people, they take kids, because they can force the kids to be kind of the front for this drug running because they're less auspicious than an adult might be. And if that kid doesn't want to comply or refuses to do it, they will just, again, disappear, kill that child. And so she spent, the better part of the last 4 years searching. And, she said to me, she has 2 other children. She said, my other children don't have a mom because this is all I do. And she was wearing a T-shirt, with his face on it, with his details on it, because there is no other way except, for yourself. And then to make it all worse, these mothers, when they go out to look for their children, they get threats. They get death threats. Sometimes the mothers are even murdered just because they are looking for the missing. And the cartels or these organized crime groups know that, when they're out searching, they might stumble across another body, or they're going to bring extra attention to the problem. And that is dangerous. So you're really in this horrible lose-lose situation. So I want nothing more than to see the good people of Mexico, our neighbors, just liberated from this crap, because they've had to live with it for far too long. There's just no negotiating with evil. And I think there are cases where and this is something I've explored a lot in my work as a journalist. What is evil? What does evil look like? And sometimes you'll meet someone who has components of evil, but you're sort of, there's a humanizing part of them, or maybe there is a certain sense of remorse, or some relatable, factor that you think somebody might be redeemable at some point in their life. But when you look at and you see these stories and the absolute barbarity, and let's just cut up a child into 100 pieces and send it to their parents just as a warning because we feel like doing that today. There's no negotiating with that. That is just pure evil. And the only way you can deal with pure evil is to get rid of it, whatever that takes. So that is the hard part of that. And I want nothing more than to see the people of Mexico be able to live a much more fruitful, much more, safe life that will enable them to not want to come to the United States, that will enable them to be able to stay, in their country and live, live freely, because in many cases, in many parts of the country, that just isn't the case.
Yeah. Well, I had the privilege as a young man to spend quite a bit of time in Mexico, and not in the tourist areas on the ocean, with some of the villages, some of the people, and it's one of the just incredible people. I mean, wonderful, the culture, the people, wonderful place. But the corruption is so bad. It's a shame. I can't take my kids. I wouldn't take my kids down there right now. The evil, the corruption has gotten so out of hand. And, I agree with you. One of the things I think is we all tend to look for some humanizing element in everybody. It's hard to believe that someone could truly be as inhuman as some of these people are. But while we're trying to figure out how we redeem every single person on the planet, you have to recognize that if someone is killing people, torturing people, I mean, listen, there is no redemption. They can, I'm a Christian. They want redemption. They can talk to Jesus right now. We got to stop you from killing people. And, think about, I think, and I know that I have the tendency to do this. You made a statement, and I want to stress that statement. You mentioned, a person who would just choose to cut someone into 100 pieces and then mail them to their parent to send a message is evil. Yeah. But what you just said there, and everybody watching, I hope they'll hear, what Holly just said is a real thing. They'll take your child, cut them to pieces, maybe alive, and then mail those pieces back to you to send you a message. Don't mess with us. And you may not even have been messing with them. You just might have been in the wrong spot at the wrong time. It doesn't matter. There is no accountability there. And again, much of this was fueled by Biden's open border policies, because we empowered those cartels. The cartels made so much more money trafficking drugs and children and women and everything else that they could traffic when the borders were open, that they could afford to kind of complete their control of the government. They had the money to buy the silence. In fact, they had enough money and have enough money. They've built essentially their own military. And many of the Central and South American governments are terrified. They don't want to fight with the cartels because they're possibly better armed than the governments are.
They're much. I mean, I can say definitively they're much better armed than the governments. I mean, Mexico in many places will send their police out with 6 rounds of a 9mm. Like, how is that going to, fare? And so you can imagine, yes, there is corruption in the police force and a complete demoralization. But when you see things like that, you kind of understand why. It's very much a losing battle for them. And nobody's signing up to the police force to go on a suicide mission. But unfortunately, that is the position that they're often put in.
Well, Holly, I got to be honest with you. I think I would enjoy talking to you for about 3 more hours. And it's just very, very interesting. And I wish that we had time to get into. I got so many things I'd like your perspective on. I mean, we've got some interesting.
Yeah, I'll come back anytime, Tom.
Yeah, well, good, because we would love to chat some more. I mean, there's so many current events in the U.S. and elsewhere we didn't even get to touch on. But I really appreciate your time. I want everybody to support Holly. Make sure you're looking her up. HollyMcKay.com, HollyMcKay.com, Holly S. McKay.substack.com. Make sure you're checking those out. We got to get journalists support that when they're doing their job, when they're willing to actually speak truth. And we had a lot of truth today. So we touch things that you're not supposed to talk about when you're a journalist. I mean, you're certainly not supposed to talk about some of the transgressions against women and people who are gay and those sorts of things in the Middle East. You're certainly not supposed to talk about the terror that's occurring and the child trafficking occurring across the border. So I'm glad to talk to you, glad to get that perspective. Guys, TomRenz.com, www.tomrenz.com. Support us, givesandgo.com/RenzLaw. Thank you all for listening. We will be back very soon.